guys.
Thanks.
Okay.
See you later,
thank you
Cap.
for coming, and thank you for being here at the Eisenhower Library Comic Fest virtually. We appreciate it. My name is Penny, and we have we have one more panel after this. This is going to be on cosplay, and then we're going to show you all of our cosplay entrants because we got quite a few, and we're going to have the awards ceremony after that. Right now, if you have a chance to get to the Artist Alley at some point, there's about 30 or 40 different artists that are there, and some of them have discounts and special things for the day. And if you happen to live in the Norwich Harwood Heights area, Atlas Comics is also doing a special where they have 10% off until the 13th, as long as you mention Comic Fest, and they'll be giving you 2 free comic book day books as well. So we have all these fabulous people here. I'm going to try to run through quick intros for everyone. And this is on diversity in comics. So, all right, in order that I have these printed out, Wesley Sun works with his brother, Brad, to write, illustrate, and self-publish comics and graphic novels under Sun Brothers Studios. He lives in Chicago. They have made their first 2 books, Chinatown and Apocalypse Man, free to download and read during the pandemic, which is really lovely. Thank you. He has the link would be, you can find the link on his website. And he is also a hospital and jail chaplain who has been spending 2020 training new chaplains to care for patients and families during the COVID-19 crisis. So that is
Wesley.
Steenz.
Hey, good to be here.
Thank you. Steenz is from St. Louis. She is an editor and a professor, the cartoonist on the syndicated comic strip Heart of the City, the co-creator of Dwayne McDuffie award-winning graphic novels Archival Quality, and is featured in short story anthologies such as the Eisner and Ignatz award-winning Elements, Fire, Mine, and Deadbeats. She launched and edited the popular RPG periodical Rolled and Told, which has gone very well at the library, I would like to say.
Oh.
She participates in and creates community-building comics-related programming and is a frequent panelist at Comic Cons. Currently teaching cartooning at Webster University and editing titles from Mad Cave Studios. So that's Steenz.
Yeah.
Steenz.
Jean Ha has had a long career in superhero comics, but his latest book is the fantasy YA graphic novel May, the story of an 18-year-old May Fortell who follows her long-missing sister Abby to a world full of mad science and mystery. Volume 1 includes art by the Eisenhower Library's Naomi Timpany, who is in this panel, but you can't see her right now. Jean has won 4 Eisners, the highest award in American comics, and his website is jeanha.com. And Gabe Batista, the artist for Dead of Winter, as well as The Life After from Oni Press. He has won Eisners for his work in Comic Book Tattoo and Love is Love, published by Image Comics. He also does art streams Sunday afternoons on Twitch under the name of, is it Galvasar? Did I say it right?
Got it. Yep, that's right.
Okay, excellent. So that's everybody. And thank you all very much for coming. And I threw a couple of questions together just to sort of get the conversation moving. And I think one of the big things, because we're talking about diversity in comics, is that your representation and the own voices thing that is so big right now. And I wanted to just sort of throw that out and see how you feel. If you feel that there's representation, if you feel that it's getting better, if you feel sort of compared then and now, if you would like to do that. And just sort of talking about what you feel about the Own Voices movement and who is allowed to tell stories for different people.
Big question.
Can we get an intro for Robin? Can we hear from Robin?
Yes, Robin.
My name is Robin Ha. I'm the author and the illustrator of Almost American Girl, which is a graphic novel memoir about myself as a 14-year-old moving from Seoul, Korea to Huntsville, Alabama in mid-1990s. Well, I'm really glad.
I'm sorry I didn't have a bio for you.
It's okay. I just said it right now. So
yes, you did. Thank you.
Had a chance to read this book. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I think there is definitely a huge push towards more diverse voices in any genre or any entertainment form right now, which I think is amazing, and I'm really hopeful for the future. I just hope that it had started a little bit earlier, especially, well, I am biased because I'm Asian, so I mean, it's been very difficult to see any Asian main characters in mainstream comics ever, really. And I think just in the last 5 to 10 years at the most, like I started seeing more and more diverse main characters, not just the sidekicks, you know. And like whenever there's like a Comic-Con or any kind of like literary fest, I have been to many of them, and I've been also invited to be in a panel like this before, diversity panel or like women in comic panel, things like that. And I think there are definitely audiences who are voicing their desire to read more different type of stories that reflects themselves. And if you ever been to any Comic Cons, like there are a lot of fans of color and a lot of women who are reading comics. And I think it's just being caught on by the head of DC, Marvel, like big name publishers now that, oh yeah, these people read comics, we should make comic for these people. And I still think that there are room for growth, because even though it's a good direction they were going, including more new authors who are from different backgrounds, I still think that there are some kind of like cage put on them in a weird way, like they are expected to tell certain type of story just because they're from certain backgrounds. And I think that can only go away when this becomes more of the norm, that you don't have to shine so much light on, that people will just accept any author as the author, not just Asian American author or Black author or women author, but just an author with a story to tell. And they wouldn't be so put on by these expectations of the readers expecting certain type of story from these authors.
Yeah, I also think there's like two different, like, I guess, misconceptions when it comes to own voices and representation. And one is, you know, the media representation. You know, we see, you know, if someone says like, imagine a comic book fan, you know, the first image that's going to come to mind is like either comic book guy in The Simpsons or like, you know, someone who's like living in their basement or someone who's weird, you know. But if we really take a look at the industry in all of the years that it's been around, it's incredibly diverse, and it always has been. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think it's important to not just show, you know, characters of color, but to also show that there are fans of color that have always been here as well. But the second thing is that, you know, as much as we want to have characters of color in, you know, in our books and comics and TV, we also need to make sure that we have that on the back end as well. You know, you're definitely going to need editors of color. You're going to need people in marketing and sales and, you know, running companies as well, because you can only do so much if you say like, oh, okay, well, let's throw, you know, a Black character in there. But if you don't have a Black writer or a Black editor or a Black artist, you're going to end up running into mistakes and problems, you know. So you can really only go so far. And I think that's one of the reasons why, you know, own voices is so important, because it's like, well, we're telling our own stories the way it actually needs to be told. But like Robin was saying, we want to also tell other stories too, you know. Like when I got my agent, I noticed that, you know, a lot of the stories that she works with are own voices and, you know, identity stories. And I told her, I was like, I love you as an agent, but I'm not going to do those kinds of stories. You know, like there are other people who can. And I think that one of the best ways for us to move forward is to accept those kinds of stories. You know, like I want to see a mystery that, you know, takes place in a Black neighborhood, but you don't have to worry about them having to constantly talk about the struggle or racial injustice. It's like, the real point of the matter is that we're in a haunted house right now. We need to not get killed by this ghost, you know? So that's what I'm hoping that we see more of, just diverse stories that don't just focus on identity as well.
Yeah, there's an issue of, like, especially in the history of comics, of course, there's tokenization where you just have the one character who's supposed to represent all Black people, or who's supposed to represent all Asian people, or whatever, or the notorious one X-Men who's supposed to represent Native Americans, then got killed off 1 or 2 episodes later, or issues later. And when it's done by people who don't understand the experience and are just throwing in a character to represent that character, you end up with a character like Thunderbird, who's just like this angry Native American guy, or the original incarnation of Luke Cage, who's just angry Black guy, who's just, and that's all he was, what they knew to represent him initially. I would say, like, in movies, something that was really, really exciting to me was Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, where it wasn't only Asian leads, but it wasn't Asians who were there to be a stereotype. They were actually just slackers for a hamburger late at night. And it's like, oh my God, yes, this is real life experience. This isn't just computer kid and, you know, engineer or stuff. Like, it's life. You know, just the broader experience of life. That's what Steenz is talking about, of just like, there's so much more to life beyond just the ethnicity. And it's nice to see it represented.
This is something I'm just going to throw in. We've been having a discussion at the library a lot about that it's, you know, especially with all the Black Lives Matter and things like going on right now, where we're saying it doesn't have to be, or American Dirt or something like that. It doesn't have to be, this is the struggle. It has to be, maybe this is a person who's just living their life. And this is what's going on. So, yeah.
And then once we have that sort of thing, it makes it a lot easier for people to relate to others. You know, if you're just reading stories about, like, you know, the immigrant experience, then when you finally meet somebody who's first generation, the only thing you think to talk to them about is their, like, the fact that they're an immigrant, which is like, I don't want to talk about that, you know, like, don't you like music? Don't you like art? You know, like, we have so much more to us that isn't just our ethnicity, that we want to be able to, like, talk about it and have it be a part of us. But, you know, once you get really deep dive into who a person is, it makes it a lot easier to relate to others on a personal level, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like when it comes to just, like, this is a really weird tangent, but when you're just hanging out with people, and, you know, like, and there's all different types of people you're hanging out with, a lot of times these things don't come up, you know, like, maybe at some point they, you know, like, somebody brings up the subject of, you know, whatever, immigration, whatever. But for the most part, like, none of this stuff comes up, because you're all more interested in, you know, like, oh, so did you see that movie? Did you watch that game? So on and so forth. But then when it gets to be about money, I feel that then that's when people start to like, you know, like, oh, well, we need this, we need that, we're gonna need this, we're gonna need that. And it almost feels like things get way too, people are trying too hard. When really, I feel like it's one of those things where you try too hard and things get worse. Whereas really, if you just, like, be natural about it, and then, you know, it'll come out. And I feel like that's what's been happening over the past, like, decade. Because, I mean, like, you know, like, Gene and Wesley, like, I've known them for, like, probably, like, a decade. And I know, like, going to conventions for over a decade, I've seen this, like, gradual increase in, like, the demographic of people that go to conventions. And it's beautiful, because it used to be where, you know, like, 1998, you'd go to a convention and it was all dudes, and it was all, like, for the most part, it was just, like, all white dudes. But now it's like a sea of, like, you know, it's like you're just walking around in downtown New York. And I'm glad, I feel like a really sense of pride that I'm in comics right now, and we're at this forefront of like this new explosion of like just like a big old melting pot. I don't know if that's still okay to say melting pot, but that's
Yeah, I appreciate that, Gabo. I don't need to rehearse what my colleagues have just said so well, but maybe I'll add a couple of pieces. Steenz, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, good to meet you, by the way. I think you're the one I haven't met yet. I really appreciate what you said. What I often say on panels when I'm invited about diversity and representation is I often say like, well, the goal is not to convince white people to draw black people. That's not a goal I have. I think the goal is to get a rich diversity of voices to do whatever they want, right? To really empower artists with the freedom to create. And that variety of experience will come because you write what you know. If you write authentically, you write your experience, and so that appears on the page. And Gabo, I appreciate your last remark about money and about the artificiality of a certain kind of checklist of making, I think what you said is trying too hard. In my limited experience, I think the money piece sort of cuts both ways. So for a small self-published indie guy like me, one thing I really appreciate is that fans get to vote with their dollars. I remember I was on a panel like this, and it was I was in a room full of mostly white people explaining to me how valuable it was to have my presence there. And I said, you want to know the best way for me to come back? Is you got to spend your money. Like, I don't care who you are or how long you've been in the business. We're all going to do a calculus of our time, our energy, our talent, our money, and where else we could be and the kind of work we could get done. And you're in direct control of whether I come back to the show, to be honest with you, because you can spend your money wherever you want. And I'm not telling you you shouldn't spend your money on X, Y, and Z people, or you have to spend it on this demographic or whatever. But I mean, the reality is you can get me back anytime you want if you put forth the resources to get me there. And so I feel like in my time in Comic-Con and in comics, it's been easier to see communities that value a rich plurality of voices, because it shows up in a very quantifiable way at the end of the weekend. I can see where the money goes, and you can see how the trends go at different shows because of where people are investing. So I think that's both a somewhat cynical perspective, but it's also very empowering, I think, to the consumer to understand that the way they spend their money does matter and changes who shows up.
I don't think it's cynical. I think it's just realistic. It's pragmatic. I mean, on the one hand, yes, if you spend money on my work, obviously I'm going to come in and say hello. But also we have to think about when it comes to like panels and exhibits and all of that, who is organizing these and what does their Rolodex look like? If you're putting together a panel that's like, how to pencil quickly so you can make your deadlines, you want to make sure that you get anyone who has had experience penciling for single issue comics. And so when you look at that, then you have to think about, okay, well, let's get a couple of different voices in here as well. So think about who's doing these penciling and what are their backgrounds, because it's a lot easier for people to, again, get used to having things being diverse if you think about it in a way that's less focused on the diversity, not to like, disparage a diversity panel, but like, if you're gonna make things more normal and normalize having a diverse representation across the board, it has to happen on all kinds of panels, on all kinds of events, Yeah.
I was part of one of the more notorious Comic-Con diversity panels, where the lead writer on the panel, it was a women in comics panel, where initially the male writer who led this panel did not invite any women. And when I noticed this, I was kind of like, I contacted him and said, hey, this is an issue. Maybe we should invite some women. And he was like, oh, thanks for bringing up that point. And then he didn't. And then I talked to the con organizer and said, so has so-and-so invited some women yet? And he was like, what? He didn't tell me there was an issue that we should invite more people. I was just leaving him in charge of it. And
oh, geez.
Yeah. And his argument, after we'd forced him to invite some women, was that a man can write women. And as long as you have a man who understands, a man who understands women but doesn't invite them to
Mm-hmm.
panels, writing women, isn't that enough representation? And my argument in this case, it's for women or Native Americans or anything else which I have not experienced. You know, I can talk to my friends who are, you know, women or Native American or whatever, and ask about their experiences. But I can't pull anything new from that beyond what they tell me. I can't pull new experiences out beyond things I've seen in TV and movies. I can only repeat what I've already heard. I can't represent it. I can't tell the story in a new way. And frankly, I mean, not every writer who actually is, say, like Asian American, I don't think I could write a really great story about being Asian American as a theme. But if I hone my skills and really examine my life, I could draw something out that's new. And if you're not that, you can't pull out something new and tell that story in a new way.
That's great. I never considered that. Like, that you can like only do so much because you're just repeating what someone told you and you can't bring out something new. That's great. I'm gonna use that forever.
Yeah.
But
I think
also,
go ahead, Robin.
like, I am actually pondering this issue right now because basically my last 2 books were about me being Korean American. And my 3rd book that I'm working on is a fiction, but it's also set in Korea. It's set in Korea in 16th century. So it's pretty far away from my life, and it's like a fantasy story with magic and everything. But still, it's about Korea. So like, I feel like, you know, like I've kind of used up my Korean venture into some other characters, you know? But I don't know how to do that correctly. You know, that's the problem. Like, I can't keep writing about what I know, but also I don't want that to be my only shtick. You know, I want to grow and be able to tell all kinds of story, and that is one of the other reasons that, like, I don't want to discourage other race, you know, other authors from different race, from, you know, away from writing stories about people who are not like them, you know. Like, if that is the case, then like we're in deep trouble. Like like we are supposed to be able to, if we're good writers, we're supposed to be able to write about any type of people, you know. But like, how to do this well, that is the question. And like, I think
the answer to that is knowing what's a story that you can and can't write. And I think a part of it is focusing on identity and otherwise. You know, like, I can make a story and it's completely diverse. You know, like Heart of the City is about a little white girl. I am not white, you know, but I'm also not writing about what it's like to be white and have non-white friends. I'm not writing about what it's like to be white and have a single mother, you know, because I don't know. That's not my life. And so if I'm not writing about someone else's identity, then it's totally fine for me to write characters of races that are not my own, you know?
Let me switch this kind of experience thing to just another framework, which is kind of similar. Like, for instance, if I want to write a story about somebody who's military, like someone who's been in the military, a veteran, stuff like that, I'm not going to join the military to do that. I could, but I'm not going to do that. But what I will do is I'll talk to my friends who have been in the military and ask them lots of questions, ask them to be honest with me, show actual interest. And then after I get the product of what I've written based on what they've advised me with, I'll beg them, you can't force them, beg them if they have the time to read it over and tell them, does this work? Does this make sense to you? Did I get anything wrong, or does anything ring inauthentic? And that applies to everything where you're writing about what you don't know. If you've never been a teacher or you've never been a librarian, I mean, there are librarians all over the place who will talk to you because they're stuck behind a reference desk, or at least they used to be before the pandemic. But, you know, I mean, write what you know, but expand what you know.
Yeah, and I think that's just like a difference of a job, a vocation versus an identity, you know, because anybody can join the military, you know, anybody can be a librarian, but not anybody can talk about what it's like to be Black, you know? So that's why I think it really just depends. Like, yes, definitely get as much background and you know, information and talk to people, because that's the only way you're really going to get the best product out of something. But I think there's still a definite like difference between writing something that someone chooses to be versus writing something that someone has no choice over, you know?
Yeah. So how many people are traditionally published here? Is anyone traditionally published?
Yes.
Okay. So versus the traditional publishing, and those of you who are traditionally published, have you self-published as well?
Yes.
So does anybody want to talk a little bit about that experience? You know, just a little about how the difference between the two of those and how you feel about, I don't know that diversity actually plays into that, but although it could, if you are trying to be traditionally published, it could, certainly. It's not probably going to affect you as much if you're trying to self-publish. But I would like to hear sort of what people's experiences have been on the publishing end of this whole thing.
So the only stuff that I've self-published are like mini comics, which still count as self-publishing. I guess it just feels a little different because it's not like bound super nicely. But what I do like about self-publishing versus traditional is that you have control over everything, absolutely everything. And I mean, I've, you know, dealt with traditional publishers and they're being like, okay, well, it has to be, you know, this size, this template. We're not sure we want to talk about X, Y, and Z. You know, there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of barriers put in when you're doing traditional publishing. And so while you can get, you know, a lot more marketing that way and you get more money that way, you're still at the mercy of the publisher. Meanwhile, when it's self-publishing, you have the powers in your hands, you know, and it's actually a really great idea to self-publish before trying to get traditionally published, because I think it helps with knowledge about what works for you and what doesn't. I know, having worked with comic publishers and now working with traditional publishers, I also see a difference with that as well. And like having that backup knowledge of, well, I've done this before in self-publishing, or I've done this before with my last publisher, so I know how this works. That's really helpful before you get into traditional publishing, just because the nature of the world right now, traditional publishers like Scholastic, Macmillan, you know, Harper, they've been in the industry for a while, but they haven't been in the graphic novel industry for a while. And there's a lot of stuff they could learn. So being an artist who's done it before, self-published and being published at smaller publishers, it definitely helps a lot when you're working with a traditional publisher.
Can I throw a question out there? I broke into the industry in 1992. And at this time, there was not a lot of self-publishing. There was some, but the main way to break in was sending submissions to Marvel or DC Comics at that time, or a smaller publisher. But as far as I know, it seems like nowadays, young writers and artists are pretty much only breaking in by self-publishing and then using that as proof that, you know, creating their portfolio, which then might later lead to a traditional publisher. Is it possible to just, is it sensible to try to just break in through a mainstream publisher instead of self-publishing?
If you want to eat, maybe you should probably self-publish for a bit if you want to eat, because that was my number one goal, was to, you know, to be able to eat while I'm making comics, and then the mainstream thing comes after. But I definitely have seen, I know people that, you know, straight out of school, or they just, you know, they haven't self-published at all and they've just been drawing like maniacs for no reason, and then they get, you know, a deal with someone, and definitely possible. But I think the youth of now is a lot smarter and a lot hungrier, and they definitely, you know, you can't afford an iPad to make comics if you don't make comics. So, you know, I think it'd be silly for anyone to do it, you know, the old school route, because it's not, you know, it's almost like wasted money, you know, like, because you have that residual income that you can make from the old comics that you had. So like at the point where I actually got like a real deal, you know, doing a comic for a publisher, I was able to like go to a convention and have like a of things that I did when I was just a little dude. that I could sell to the people who now know me as the big dude. So it's definitely smarter to just do it, and it gives you a reason to work on your stuff, you know. Whereas some people refuse to do little comics, and they're not actually honing their craft. They're just sitting around playing video games. So.
And one thing I have to say is that I have a lot of friends who are self-publishers, and they publish their own work along with other people's work. But from all of these people that I've heard, that it's very hard to make a living publishing, self-publishing. So it's definitely a great place to try new material out. Like, it's like a lot low, how do you call it, overhead to experiment with like your news story idea. Like, if it actually sticks with people that you meet, at the convention or online. Online is like almost free. So like, that's a great way to self-publish, and then you can do like Patreon and all the other stuff to like make money from it. But like actual printing, like small publishers have a very hard time to make the ends meet. So unless you have a lot of money from somewhere else, like I wouldn't really suggest doing that like full time. Like, I mean, like, it is really difficult. But I think these days, a lot of people start that way and they build up, audience, like, and a lot of publishers these days, even though I don't really agree with this, they really look at how many followings you already have. So like, if you're a brand new author and you have never published anything through those big publishers, they'll immediately ask you like how many followers you have, and how do you get these followers without actually starting somewhere, So I think it's kind of necessary for people to start somewhere, like, whether it's actually printing those mini comics or putting things online or going to conventions or whatever. And if you can keep going that way, and like, I know a lot of people who make a lot of money doing Kickstarters, and like they're set for like a year, and that's great, but that's actually really rare that happens. So I think it's always good to have some kind of backup plan. Like, self-publishing shouldn't be like the one basket you put all your resources into.
I do think there's two things you have to consider when you're thinking about self-publishing and getting your foot in the door. One is what your portfolio is, and two, and it's your normie job. So when it comes to your portfolio, I have found that a lot of students, art students and students who have gone to, state schools and went for art, they think that once they get out of school, they're immediately going to get a full-time job in their career. And that is not the case. And it's not the case because, you're not good enough. It's because that is not the reality of the situation. So I really wish professors would stop telling their students to try and get a job right out of college, because it doesn't exist. But also, you have to think about when an editor is looking for a creator, yes, sometimes they are looking at their follower count, but they're also looking at, what have you done? Prove to me that you can do a sequential comic. And your figure drawing from drawing 2 is not going to cut it. Your project for color theory is not going to cut it, So you have to do self-published artwork to prove that you can even do comics. Now, the second thing, which is a normie job, I did not go full-time in comics until about 10 years after I dropped out of college, because that's just not how it works. You just can't immediately jump right into freelance without having a background. The things that I do for freelance are editing, cartooning, and teaching. Editorial, I had to have an editorial job before I could do freelance editorial on my own, because otherwise, how are people going to know to choose me? Cartooning, I had to do my own self-published work to get a traditional book so I can get more jobs so that I can do cartooning. Teaching, I had to do community programs that educate on comics because I didn't want to go to school for teaching. So I did a free program where you can learn about comics, and now I teach. So it's like, in order to get to that point where you're just doing art, there's a lot of other stepping stones that you have to do first. And in order to get through those stepping stones and not be hungry is by having a normie job, or as my friend calls it, a muggle job. You know, like I was working at Victoria's Secret, Hallmark store, comic book store, you know, library. I mean, I was doing a lot of different stuff that had nothing to do with drawing, you know, but it kept food on my table. It kept a roof over my head. And I like for people to know that I have to say like 95% of creators currently are not doing this work full-time freelance on their own. They have another backup, whether it is a normie job or a spouse. That's just the nature of the industry.
Wes, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I can't speak to the comparative question you asked about traditional publishing because I've only self-published. But I just like, I appreciate Steenz, your remark about muggle and normie jobs. So I'm a multi-vocational person, right? I don't do, so I'm a writer. I'm not an illustrator of any sort. But that is in some ways by design. That is to say, I have lots of different careers. Up until 2 years ago, I was on the faculty at the University of Chicago as a professor there. And people in the academic world would say, oh, so comics is like your normie job, and this is like your real career. This is serious. You're at a major university. This is Ivy League. And then people at Comic-Con would say like, oh, so you you teach grad students to pay the rent, and then this is your real career. And I would say, well, I would like to push back on the kind of dichotomy. I'm not responding to you directly, Steenz. I'm just saying there are a lot of models for how to build a career. And that's not about comics. That's just the world we live in now.
Yes.
And so for me, I would say that the question is, what is the through line of your vocations that allows you to bleed your passion and your creativity into the work you do? So for example, Penny, when you introduced me, you mentioned that I'm also a jail chaplain. So I visit incarcerated women at Cook County Jail. I don't do that now because of COVID, but it's what I do, and I train grad students to go in with me. And one of the things I'll say as a writer is I just get generated pages and pages of dialogue automatically with that job, right? Just automatically. I mean, we were talking to people who live different experiences. I've never been incarcerated, you know, and like Jean said, I'm not gonna get arrested to write a character who's been incarcerated. And if you ask me like, oh, so you go to the jail just to do research as a writer? And I would say, if you drop the word just or merely, I would say yes. I would say that what I am is a storyteller, and I trust very much that real stories, authentic and true stories, do resonate with other stories, whether around difference or sameness. It doesn't really matter. I really trust human beings as empathic and creative creatures. And so when I'm talking to an incarcerated person and they're telling me their experience, it doesn't bank on me having the same experience. And it doesn't bank on me writing a book or a script at that moment about being incarcerated. It's about communicating human truth and human experience. And so what I would say is that I have a multi-vocational life, and but it is true, yeah, if I dropped all of them except for script writing, I wouldn't be making my rent on that alone. I agree with I agree with the reality of what everybody said, but I think that there's a lot of pathways, and all of them, I mean, there isn't an easy one, is what I'm saying. Like, they all require hard work, creativity, resilience, and resourcefulness. There really isn't another way to go, as far as I'm aware.
Excellent, thanks. I want to ask people if they have, that are attending, if they have any questions, to put them in chat or the question and answer, so that we can pull those up, because we only have about maybe 8 or 9 more minutes on this. There was something that I was making notes here, and I have to see if any of these. So you all, I'm feeling that you all feel that there's a better representation now in comics for a diversity of audiences than there used to be. Am I right on that? Are we all kind of in agreement with that? Okay, so just out of curiosity, I guess, oh wait, there's a question. Okay, this kind of ties in, but this is not what I was going to ask. But this is a question, which is, what is something you would like to see or think comics still need in regards to diversity? So I will throw that one out, see if anyone would like to field that one.
This is really, really, really specific, but I think editorial needs to stop requiring people work in the office, because most book publishers are in New York or the other coast, West Coast, and it's a very expensive place to live in, incredibly expensive. And they're not offering internships that pay, and they're not offering low-level editorial jobs that pay enough for you to survive in New York. You know, like $30,000 isn't going to cut it, unfortunately, not in New York. So I think there needs to be more openness to mentorships and editorial jobs that can be done remote, so that you have a wider pool of people to choose from when you decide to bring in editors into your publisher. Editors, sales, marketing, all of that, anyone that's behind the scenes, because otherwise you're only going to be pulling from people who can afford to live there.
Yeah, that's really valid, I think. Do you have any feelings that after all of the pandemic and all of the remote stuff there might be a change in that?
I don't know. When I was working as an editor for a publisher, you know, it was specifically a comics publisher, you know, and those just work differently than traditional publishing. So I don't think I really have the background or the knowledge to really say if I think it could actually change. I hope it does, though.
Yeah, that I kind of agree with that. Okay, does anybody else want to jump in on that one? No.
I'll just say broadly, I mean,
Sure.
just repeating a theme that we had earlier, which is that when you have like, you know, the Asian story that's not just about being Asian or being about Latin American or something like that, it allows you to actually drill into kind of the details of a specific experience of just like, I mean, we have an overrepresentation of geeky people here who are very, very, in many ways, very similarly geeky and kind of love many of the same comics and stuff like that, even though we work in different genres now. And when you have lots of representation for any one thing, not just one book that's like the Jewish book or something like that, it gives a kind of a wider voice and it shows life better in general. You want to have multiple creators, you want to have multiple editors who have had various experiences like that. You want diversity at every level and stuff like that. And it really broadens things out. And this is important for publishers. It lets you tap into new markets in a way that you couldn't otherwise if there's only one person of color in your office and they have to represent all diversity.
Yeah, very true. There was something in the question and answer. It was just saying thank you. It was saying it's not a question, but thank you for this because it's really interesting. Is there anything else? Because we only have a couple of minutes. So is there anything else that anybody wants to add?
I'll just say that hand in hand with questions of diversity are questions of accessibility. And so I think one thing that maybe comics culture can work on is higher accessibility, right? So even coming to the conventions as a consumer, as a fan is cost prohibitive for a lot of people, even outside of Corona times, right? Let's presume airlines and hotels and everything are open. Well, only a certain segment of the population can fly and see these things. So I think, I mean, and that's part of why I'm part of this conversation, because I want to support public libraries. Like a lot of cons have gone online. I've said no to all of them except for the libraries, because, and like I said, yeah, you're welcome. And Penny, I've come out in the summer to do comic book camp with the kids. I made two of my comics free to read during the pandemic. I think that hand in hand with diversity is accessibility. And so whether you're a creator or a fan, an organizer, a librarian, whoever you are, anything you can do to increase accessibility, I think automatically lends itself to valuing diversity. So I would encourage any of those changes that move us in that direction.
Do I have time to ask a question?
Yes, can I throw out, just real quick, just throw this out, which is from Trevor Mueller, which says, thank you to everyone on the panel. What are some things that creators can do, or indie creators, beyond finding diverse creative partners to help improving diversity in the industry and in books being produced? And one other that says, and I love you guys, but also someone who's just wanted to say that the panel has been incredible. Thank you all so much. So I give you Trevor's question, and then Jean, go for whatever you had as well.
Okay, let me spin this out in two ways, which is as the oldest creator by far on this panel, it's important to try to mentor people who aren't just like you or just like the people who came before you, and to be willing to spend a little bit of extra effort and a little bit of extra time just giving advice to somebody who contacts you online and has different experiences and might have a story that's really valuable to the world that hasn't been told yet. Also, because this is the Eisenhower Library and you have a very diverse patron base with lots of different experiences from all across, you know, and also you've done programs to actually help teach the kids how to make comics. Do the panelists have any advice for the young creators who, you know, check out books and stuff like that at the Eisenhower Library?
And I will tell you that our graphic novel section, at least in the teen space, is really popular. I see the kids, I have, you know, all these shelves of novels, and they just go to the graphic novels. They walk out with these stacks. So that's really great, and that's really good.
I think one thing that you can do as a creator to improve diversity in the industry is there's something a friend of mine says. She says, you always have one hand forward and one hand back. So, you know, always reach for what you want, but bring somebody with you, you know, open the door for somebody else. And to answer Jean's question, I think not waiting until you think you're ready to put out a comic that you want to do, because you're never going to be ready. I'm not ready still, you know? So even if you think, well, let me think it, let me get a little better at coloring, just put the story out, you know? You've got the internet at your fingertips, especially at the library. You should be able to, you know, upload whatever you like. Just do it before you think you're ready.
I will say one of the things Trevor said just before you guys was just make comics.
Yeah.
I actually,
Keep making them.
in early 2000s, I started a website, still around. It's called entervoid.com. And it's a website designed, it's a comic book battle website. So you create a character, another artist creates a character, and then you sort of duke it out in pages. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, we're, you know, fighting with our fists. Like there's people like who do like a chess match or just like a mind game, whatever. But the reason I created it is because I knew that my art wasn't good enough to be able to get a job anywhere. But I felt like my writing was okay. And I felt like at some point, both of those are going to come up and they're going to catch up to each other. If not, one of them will surpass the other. And I'll be able to find a job in one of those. So the point is, like Steenz was saying, like, just do it. Like everything that you draw today is going to be awful. And you're going to look at it and you're going to say, oh my God, what was I thinking? Why am I drawing a nose? I wasn't, that's not even a nose. Why was I drawing it? And that might even happen within like a month. Like it's gonna constantly change, and you will not learn how to ride that bicycle until you get on the bicycle. And it's just impossible. And also don't look at other artists and think, oh, well, I suck. Because that artist is looking at another artist and thinking, oh, I suck. And it's cyclical, you know, and it's not gonna help you. Just look at them and think, someday I'll be at that level. I know I will because I work hard. And that's the only other way that you can get there. Just work hard.
And I want to add that, like, if you're a young creator, like, don't be afraid to start something, like form a group. Because, like, I think there's like a strength in number. Like, everybody's like, you know, self-conscious and they're shy and they don't want to show their stuff to anybody. But I remember when I was a teenager, I met like 4 other girls from going to like anime convention, and they were all like me. So we formed a group and like we put out a zine together and all of that, like just anything to kind of get you going and kind of, you know, shed your, you know, shell. And that could be done, I think, in group much better and much more fun than like by yourself. So that's my advice.
I think we have to stop because we have another panel coming up. So this is on cosplay, if anyone wants to come cosplay. But thank you all so much. This has been really incredibly valuable. And I really appreciate you all taking the time to come and do this and for supporting the con at Eisenhower and all that good stuff. So thank you. And I think Chris is going to close this out. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Guys,
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.